But it is Tuesday, the 17th of March, 2026. We live, won't come as any great news to many of you, in an age of hard times on lots of fronts, but doesn't seem to be particularly new. Charles Dickens, of course, wrote his famous novel, Hard Times, back in 1854. The great American nonfiction writer and listener, Stud Terkel, wrote his Hard Times, an oral history of the Great Depression back in 1970. And now we have a new Hard Times, a novel by my guest today, Jeff Boyd. Jeff is joining us from Brooklyn in New York. Jeff, congratulations on the new book. It's out today.
Thank you.
Obviously, there's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek in terms of the naming of your book. Hard Times, everyone always thinks of Dickens. What's the reference of your new novel to Dickens?
Well, it's interesting. Maybe it's not, I don't know, I guess maybe being in America and most of my friends, they didn't really make that connection to Dickens as fast as I thought they would. I would say that, but for me, the connection is actually this song called Hard Times by Curtis Mayfield. And so in his album, There's No Place Like America Today. And so that's actually where the title comes from. It's from a Curtis Mayfield song. And then once I was aware, I started to think about the Dickens reference probably after I was already kind of stuck to the title. And I thought it was apt to what the characters go through in the book. So, just kind of stuck.
I'm going to try, Jeff, not to make too many What the Dickens jokes in this conversation. Your previous book was quite musical, The Wait. So the Curtis Mayfield reference isn't exactly surprising. Are we living, Jeff, in particularly unusual hard times, or are hard times always the narrative? Doesn't matter what year, whether it's 1854 or 2026.
I would say, for me personally, and maybe a lot of other people feel this way, I feel like we've kind of swung back into what I would consider to be hard times. So, I think kind of coming out of what for me was more of like this kind of pie in the sky, Obama era. I guess some people thought that was hard, but for me, that was maybe more of a joyous and hopeful time. Whereas the characters in the book and maybe in my own perception of the world, I do feel like we're maybe going through kind of a fall back into these hard times, either whether we're talking about geopolitically or for the characters in the book who do go through that a particularly tough moment that I try to capture.
The Curtis Mayfield song you mentioned is from 1975, another period which people look back to of hard times. Some people compare the 70s and the 2020s. I'm guessing, Jeff, you're a bit young to remember 1975.
I am, yeah. But I did, I'm particularly interested in that history, especially in Chicago. And I think you saw, like, even that picture you were showing, it says there's no place like America today, kind of showing that juxtaposition between those kind of happy people in the car, maybe in the 40s and 50s, and then people kind of waiting. I think they're waiting at like an unemployment line, so it's that kind of dichotomy between those two, kind of joyous times and this idea that America's great, which I do think we say a lot now, how great America, I don't know if I say that, but people say how great America is and how it's great.
Some people say it, Jeff. Not everyone. A lot of guests on this show are a bit skeptical of that.
I can see that. Whereas you have, an uptick in unemployment. So it's almost kind of hard to see how they to justify those things. But I think a lot of, the average person, a lot of people would say that we are going through harder times, where some people might want to act as if we're living in a more prosperous time. I don't know who it's prosperous for, maybe the 1%, but for the majority of us, I do feel like we slide maybe back into less joyous and less hopeful moments.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Curtis Mayfield song comes with an image of a car. Of course, we live now at a time of inflation, oil wars, price hikes. So history in some ways is repeating itself. This is a question, Jeff, I often ask novelists and people who are writing books about contemporary America. And of course, we'll come to more detailed description of what you're writing about in the America of the 2020s. But given everything that's happening in America, from Trump to Minnesota to Black Lives Matter to so many other things, how does a novelist make stuff up, given that reality itself is so incredible, so what some literary theorists might call versions of hyper-reality? Were you sometimes, when you sat down, I know this is your second novel after The Wait, which was highly acclaimed, did you sometimes think to yourself, well, what's the point of being a novelist? I might as well write nonfiction because it's hard to make this stuff up?
Yeah, you do. I do kind of reach those moments. I think, especially when I was drafting this book, I would have, where the headlines would seem so sensational, and I guess, borrow a term like stranger than fiction. It was kind of hard to feel like sometimes as a novelist that I could keep up with that, the craziness that actually is happening in this world. But I do think that also the kind of, maybe I think a lot of writers feel this way, is that it seems so senseless what actually occurs, that it's nice to have these moments, or at least in the fictionally, to try to find the actual truth or an answer, to try to get into the heads of the people who are making these horrible decisions, or in the heads of people who maybe have been the recipient of lots of pain and trauma, and trying to kind of parse out or better understand exactly what it is in the human psyche that brings one to either enduring or dying or inflicting pain. And so I think sometimes it's almost a refuge, I feel personally as a writer sometimes, to be able to look to control something, I guess, to say, okay, these horrible moments do occur, these things do happen, why do they happen? Can I make this all kind of make sense in a narrative way that'll satisfy the reader and myself? Because I think that's kind of what's so hard, at least for me, when reading headlines or experiencing things. It's that there's no simple answer. You can't find the answer, and you almost wonder if you ever will. And so in fiction, the nice part is that I'm able to kind of play through all these scenarios with the idea that I can provide an answer to the reader and to myself.
So you're a brave fiction writer, Jeff, in acknowledging that you're looking for answers. Often fiction writers say they're not looking for answers, they're just trying to describe their version of reality. I know your first book, The Wait, was slightly autobiographical. You have a musical background. And this book must be pretty autobiographical, or at least built on some of your autobiography, because you were a school teacher in Chicago, and this book is set in Chicago in a school. So how much of this is autobiographical half times?
Yeah, I would say it starts, it is based in a school, much like one I taught at, in a neighborhood, much like the one I taught at. And some of the characters, I would say live in the apartment I used to live in Chicago. There's the suburbs of Chicago that I'm pretty familiar with. And so I would say the most autobiographical part is that I could picture the streets that I'm talking about, that I can kind of see at least a kind of stand-in for the characters that I'm writing about. And so I would say it's not as autobiographical, I guess. I wouldn't say the first book's completely autobiographical, but I would say this one kind of pulls off of what I've known, what I do know, and then tried to stretch myself. So, it's definitely more of a stretch, I would say, as I wrote this novel.
So you talk, Jeff, about answers that you're trying to put forward in your book, your new novel, Hard Times. What's the question then that these answers are trying to address?
That's a good question, because there's so many questions, I think, at any given moment.
We don't have to have one. What are the series of questions? What are you trying to answer?
I guess a lot of it's the why. A lot of it is, I do have this kind of, at least when I was writing it, this kind of preoccupation with fate, I guess, and predestination, and how much of the things that happen to us are within our control. And when I was in grad school, I had a good friend who, I grew up pretty religious. And so I think I kind of work against this idea sometimes that the world is ordained, or that, that it's all set, the path is all set. I'm very much about this individualism. And I had a very close friend who I was finding it surprising that she's not religious at all, but she kind of had this kind of view that that people are kind of destined to be who they are and go where they go, because of the circumstances of where they've grown up, because of their family, because of the society that they're in, that you could kind of, if you wanted to, kind of draw a line between where someone starts and where someone's going to end. And so that kind of, I don't know, I kind of wanted to push back against that as well. And I think my characters kind of do that as well, where you feel like there is this sort of like, well, this kid grew up in this neighborhood, he has a broken home, he's on, some kind of, food stamps, that kind of thing. And so you think, okay, that means that they're going to end up here. And I kind of wanted to have these characters who say, no, that's not what I'm going to do, who kind of fighting against this kind of, this concept of fate, which I think, we see in a lot of literature, in classic literature as well, where especially a social novel, where people are set in a position, and kind of a cast in a way, and you see them fighting against it. So I kind of wanted characters who, from the onset, you might think that or believe where they're going to end up or what decisions they're going to make because of where they started, and then seeing them kind of bucking that, or either or confirming it.
There's an irony there, of course, Jeff. Again, you don't need me to tell you this. As a novelist, you're God. You're controlling these characters. You invent them. You determine their fate, their narrative. When you invent characters in your books, and particularly in Hard Times, did you know where they were going, or did they surprise you, these characters?
Oh, they surprise me all the time. I have a hard time writing if I don't at least think I know where I'm going, but I don't hold myself to it. I don't work on an outline. Oftentimes they'll have a conversation and someone will say something and I'm surprised by it. They'll do something I'm surprised by, and they'll say, well, if this happens, that changes everything, and then I have to change, work on the trajectory that the characters are bringing me on. And so I do kind of, I think a lot of writing is kind of play. I feel like I'm kind of, same thing I did when I was a kid playing with my G.I. Joes or, toys. It's like they kind of setting their own narrative sometimes. And what I like is kind of this make-believe. And so the make-believe to me involves characters doing things that do surprise me as the narrator. And that's kind of the joy of it. I think if I sat down and always knew exactly what they were going to say and do, I wouldn't have been able to write the book. It wouldn't have been fun to me. Part of the fun is the discovery of putting two different kinds of people together and seeing what happens.
And do you think your characters are surprised by you?
Surprised by me? I don't know. I mean, I guess that kind of, I try not to be there, I think. My first book was, first person. And so it was very much, I feel like, I was in the driver's seat of what occurred and what happened. And in this one, I definitely tried to almost be this narrator. And I would almost say that kind of like a journalist, where I'd have this idea that these things had occurred. Like these moments have occurred. Like this student was shot. I don't exactly know why they were shot. I don't know what
and this is in a school in a Chicago
in a school in Chicago. Yeah, I don't exactly know what factors were at play, but my job is to ask them questions, to discover, to interrogate, and then try to write it in in a narrative form. Like I said, in a way that does kind of make sense in the end. That has giving them their actions, or seemingly sometimes just random actions, meaning as the story goes along.
Dickens's Hard Times, of course, was a form of social realism. In some ways, he invented the form. Some people liked it. Some people were quite critical. George Bernard Shaw, Thomas Macaulay thought that he hadn't done a great job. Are you, or is this book, Hard Times, in the Dickensian social realism tradition, or is it different?
No, I'd like to think so. Yeah, I do think it's in that social realist. I've always thought of myself as a realist. I'm not too interested in, science fiction or in kind of inventing a world that doesn't exist. I'm very much try to stay in the world as I understand it. And so I do think the things that happen to the characters and their lives are lives that I can believe myself are actually real and happen or have happened. And so yeah, I would call it a social realist novel.
Did you do a lot of research for it? I assume you read Studs Terkel's Hard Times. You obviously bring a lot of autobiographical research, simply having taught in a Chicago school. But
Hmm.
did you read quite a lot of history or Chicago local politics for this?
I did, yeah. I did also grow up with a father who was a police officer, and so that was kind of helpful for the police angle. I could kind of go to him and ask, could this actually happen? Is this real? Like, how would they hold their gun here? That kind of stuff. I did pull from some moments. Um, there's this the Chicago Intercept kind of investigation called Operation Brass Tacks, which is about a sergeant who started taxing local drug dealers. Um, and kind of controlling, the flow and where they could sell drugs. And, he would arrest people who didn't pay. He would set people up. Um, and it was kind of a larger conspiracy there. So I looked up that, there's moments of a student or a kid who stole a car with another kid in Chicago, and they ran away. They got stopped and they both ran away, and one of them got shot and the other one got away. And the cops, tried to figure out, like, well, who was with you? And the kid never told them, and they think the investigation kind of got swept under the rug. They never released the footage because the kid was a minor. And so I did pull from kind of news articles, and also from my imagination, kind of running with that. Like, well, what would that, if I was to actually be able to follow this kid along, to follow these people along, and actually hear and listen to everything that actually occurred? What could I imagine? And so there's a bit of research that kind of then pulled into my fictional world that I was trying to create.
What are the stereotypes, Jeff, that you're trying to smash in this book? Maybe there aren't any. I read a headline on CNN recently about the radical reduction in violent crime. Many people in America, particularly outside the big cities, tend to, I think, fetishize crime, obsess over it, and it's one of the sort of the consistently paranoid elements in American culture, that there's all this terrible, deadly, rampaging crime everywhere, especially in places like Chicago. Were you trying to, in a way, address that? I mean, this is a book about crime. It's a crime novel, but it's a form of social realism. Were you trying to calm America about what really happens in places like Chicago?
I don't know if I was trying to calm it so much, but I guess I was trying to, throw a different angle in there, or at least expand the angle. I've grown up, I've lived in Chicago, lived in the suburbs, I've lived in Iowa, and I've lived in places where people have said, "Oh, you're from Chicago," as if I've just come out of some sort of, war-torn country. Like, I can't believe I've made it out of there, which I always, found kind of humorous. So I did play with that as well. I'd have people who would say, "Oh, you're going back to Chicago, be careful," and I'm like, "Why?" Like, or even living in New York, I have family members who live, in relatively small suburbs, and they're always convinced that you just walk down the street and you're gonna get shot or mugged or something.
Especially in Brooklyn, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I always, I guess, I do kind of try to push back at that, because I do see this, kind of beauty and vibrance, and also just such diversity, between blocks even, right? So there are places in Chicago that are tough, that you might not want to walk in at a certain time of day, but if you live there, that, I think, so, but there's also very beautiful, old history. There's, the waterfront, which I love, Lake Michigan. There's the North Side. There's Hyde Park, where I lived for a while, which is a historically kind of black neighborhood where
which is where Obama's from, isn't it? Where
University of Chicago, and Obama's had a house there. I think it still might own a house there. Those are, vibrant, beautiful places. And I think that if you don't live in those cities, and you've never been there, and you come in with this preconceived idea of what Chicago is, you're going to miss out on a lot, and you're also going to kind of look funny just walking around as skittish. I mean, half of the problem people get messed with, I think, is because they walk around looking so out of place and so scared. I think if you walk into a place, oftentimes I find, as if you belong there, and respectfully, then people will see that, and they treat you with that kind of respect. And so I'd have that with my characters as well, where I feel like they are people who know how to navigate where they live. And so, I mean, horrible things do happen still, and violence does touch a lot of these characters, but on a daily basis, they also have moments that are pretty, everyday American experiences. And that's why I wanted to show that as well.
Yeah, and I know for you, place is very important. You had a nice piece in Literary Hub. We used to publish this show on Literary Hub. I would drive 220 miles to be a writer on the real distance between Chicago and Iowa. Jeff, it's interesting that you mentioned that your father was a police officer, or is a police officer.
He was, yeah.
A lot of the narratives, particularly on the progressive side, suggest that the police are the problem, especially in the inner city, inner city neighborhoods of Chicago. Is that another stereotype that you're trying to, in some ways, address in Hard Times, that the police aren't always the bad guys? I mean, you grew up with a father who was a policeman.
Yeah, I think there's so many complex reasons why someone gets into that job. I mean, a lot of it is because it's the best job they can get. I mean, it provides job security. It provides a kind of word I'm looking for, a kind of sense of purpose. A lot of people who become police officers go into it for good reasons. Part of it was, when George Floyd died, the main cop was white, but some of the other cops, were black. I think one was Asian. And I remember I had family in Minnesota also. And so, I was there once reading the local paper sometime after it occurred about one of the police officers who was black. He was black, and talking about how his family was just so proud of him because he had a hard time in high school. He was directionless, and thank God, he got this job for the Minneapolis Police Department. We kind of in his family, he's proud. He was proud of his race. To kind of read about him, and then he's one of those people who stood by and did nothing, which of course was a crime and makes him implicit. But it made me think about that person. Who is he? Like, did he come in here with this idea? Oh, I want this guy to die. I don't think so. There's so much complexity, I think, to any individual, and I think that's what I really can't get past. I have a hard time looking at anything as like a monolith, or saying all these people are bad or all these people are good. As a writer and as a person, I really do try to think about the individual and the interiority of that person. And so, I would say that I'm not one of those people who can say that all of one kind of person is bad. Unless you talk about like Nazis or something, but I just don't have that in me. So I do think that one of the reasons I do have a cop character in this book is because I did want to show the complexities of him being, a black police officer, of wanting to do good, and maybe he gets caught up in some bad, but that's not what he set out to do. That's not where his heart is, and so that's kind of what I'm trying to explore in this book as well.
You've taught school in Chicago. I know you're still teaching in in Brooklyn. It's set in a school. The main character is an English teacher. It's a tough job, Jeff, isn't it? Teaching, especially in public schools in America. You're poorly paid. People don't respect you. The kids are often disrespectful, to say the least. What were you trying to say in Hard Times about being a teacher in the America of the 2020s? I mean, these are the heroes, and they're not often acknowledged.
Yeah, I think it's what I found being a teacher is it's even really hard to even be a mediocre teacher. I mean, it's just like it takes a lot out of a person. It took a lot out of me. There's the grading. There's the dealing with the interpersonal problems with students. There's dealing with trying to work with their parents. There's all the stuff that's going on outside of the school, outside of your control. And you're kind of this kind of caregiver and caretaker, and you're a teacher, and you're kind of like you try to be like some sort of psychologist or something. You're the authority. You have to sometimes you have to break up fights, and you have to do all these things just constantly. But you also have to make sure that you have enough pencils, and you have to make sure you have enough copies for the next class, and you have a lesson plan. And so you're just kind of wearing all these hats all the time. And I do feel like it is a job that's kind of underappreciated and underpaid and supported. It's not easy to be a teacher, and I think that Buddy in the story, the teacher that we follow, kind of has to go through all those things. And I did want to kind of be able to explore what it's like to be a teacher in the inner city, or in a place like South Side of Chicago.
I mean, it's hard times for teachers. Maybe it's always been hard times, but particularly these days, isn't it? I mean, they're so badly paid and disrespected.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, it was hard for me. I decided at one point that I was going to go back to school and try to be a writer. See how that worked, because it's tough.
I know your book is also about successful people who have money. And there's obviously the vivid contrast between them and the hard times of others. If you have money, is that a way out of hard times, Jeff, or is it more complicated?
Yeah, I think it's more complicated. I think it's always easier to have money, which we also see with some of the characters in this book. And that was also the kind of this, we talk about the social aspect. As I think about being Black in Chicago, I think maybe some people think that everyone who's Black in Chicago is poor or doesn't have a lot of resources. And I wanted to show also, characters who are lawyers, characters who are in business. Buddy is he's a teacher, but his wife makes good money, so that's not his concern. He's not, he doesn't wake up concerned about how he's going to pay the bills. But then sometimes when you're not concerned about that, then you have other things that pop up. People have a certain bandwidth, I think. And so sometimes that bandwidth is, maybe it's all tied up in how you're going to make the day-to-day work. And then others have maybe more space to try to work on other aspects. And so I think that's kind of what works for Buddy as well, is that he doesn't need to keep his teaching job because he needs to pay the bills. He needs to keep his teaching job because he wants a sense of purpose, because he feels like he can do a good job, because he believes in what he's doing. And so, yeah, I think money is only a part of it, for anybody.
Jeff, it's hard as a fiction or non-fiction writer these days to avoid the political. You mentioned Black Lives Matter and what's happened recently in Minnesota. America currently has a president, of course, who has a history when it comes to accusations on violent crimes, the Central Park scandal.
Central Park 5.
Yeah, didn't seem to make much difference. He still was elected president. Is there a political dimension to this book, particularly in the context of of MAGA and the current president?
Yeah, I would say so. It's hard, like I said, it's hard for me to avoid. I am also someone who stays very kind of keyed into what's going on in the headlines and the news. And like I said, I watch too much cable news. I've cut back recently for my mental health, but yeah, I mean, I couldn't help but kind of have these kind of larger ideas about what's going on in our society, about what the truth is. I think that the truth is a big thing that seems to have been kind of eroded. I think, especially about his first term, Trump was a lot about like alternative facts, right? It was like, okay, it's not this, it's about who controls the narrative. And I thought a lot about that when I was writing this, about we may hear this, but the thing that we're seeing with our eyes is different than what we're hearing. And so how do we kind of square that? The characters in this book, there is a lot of moments where they want to figure out what's true and what's not true, where someone says, oh, he was shot because of this guy was there. And as a reader, we know that that's not true. What does that mean? And I do think that was kind of, that played out a lot with this. I do think there's a little bit of a, to me, I think as a writer, my characters are kind of players in this world, and the world that they're living in maybe is a smaller, they're on the South Side of Chicago and their own interpersonal things. But for me, I hope that it also can kind of spark these ideas about, well, what is the world that we live in? What is the truth? Who are the authority figures that we can trust? Why? Motives. And so I do try to play with, I think, all those ideas in the book.
Your players, Jeff Boyd, and your new book, Hard Times. Final question. Contemporary, or indeed historical American fiction, tends to always come back to one of the great questions, challenges and opportunities in American history, the idea of the American dream. Is this book, Hard Times, is it a book about the end of the American dream, its rebirth, its possibility, or its impossibility?
Well, as much as it feels impossible, some part of me always wants to believe. I don't know how else to get by. I don't know how, and I think that's how the characters feel it too. They can't just lie down and say, "Oh well, dream is over. I'm done for." They fight, and I think of myself also as a fighter, and I think that's also what Hard Times is kind of means to me. And that Curtis Mayfield song we were talking about, that song is about all the hard moments that people are going through. The cold eyes that are staring at them, but.
Yeah, the first line is,
yeah, the fact there's no
eyes on me, they stare. People are around me, and they're all in fear.
Yeah, but still, the hopeful part about that song, to me, when I listen to it, is it's still about fighting. It's still about saying, yeah, like we have all the cards are stacked against us, but we're not going to lie down. We're going to keep on. We're going to keep on fighting for what we believe in. We're going to fight for a better day. We're going to fight for our families and for our neighborhood, and that's, I feel, the only way to get. And that's all we can do. I feel like as a society, as people, is to believe that there is a brighter day, and that it might be difficult, it might be hard, and it might seem impossible, but if we don't fight, then what are we doing? That's the kind of, I guess, the kind of hopefully the takeaway that a lot of people have with this book is that they do see that these characters, no matter how much they're pushed back, their back is against the wall, they do find a way. At least some of them find a way to break through for another day, and to break through past what anyone might believe about them.
Yeah, the book's already being acclaimed, got a starred review on Publishers Weekly. Maybe, Jeff, it should be called Better Times rather than Hard Times. It's out today. One of America's most talented and acclaimed young writers, Jeff Boyd. It's his second novel. The first one was The Wait. Now we're on to Hard Times. Congratulations, Jeff. And we will look forward to discussing your third book when it's out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew.